Okay. Well, welcome everyone to our first event of the term. We're delighted to welcome Alithea Williams from the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children, who have been doing some really great work during Corona tide, as it were, basically publicising how this is actually affecting the unborn. So we're very grateful to them for that. So we've invited Alithea Williams here to talk to us about this issue, about abortion and the coronavirus. And Alithea she worked in the House of Commons before working for SPUC as a communications officer, and now as campaigns and parliamentary research assistant. So she's very well placed to give us an overview of this. So I'll hand over to Alithea.
Great, thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me. I've had quite a long history in student pro-life work, so I'm really happy to speak to a student society, even though it's quite a while now since I was in one. Yes, so abortion during Corona tide. I've not heard that as an expression. That's great. I'll use that. There's been different reactions to coronavirus around abortion in different parts of the world. So you'll have noticed that in the States, like many states have actually been restricting abortion, saying that it's a non-essential service. Whereas other countries, for instance, Sweden, has been giving millions of pounds to a body which promotes abortion and population control to developing countries, just as these countries are suffering from coronavirus like everybody else and suffering from a shortage of PPE. So as for this country, I have to admit, when all this started, I was expecting my work time to be quite quiet, you know, for a campaigning organisation, not being allowed to go outside or send people bits of paper in the post. I was expecting to have quite a quiet few months. But actually, the abortion lobby has used this time to push through changes that they've actually been wanting for years. So what I'm going to talk about, it is relevant to the current crisis, but it would also have more long-term implications. And that's one of the things we're really worried about. So before Corona tide, new word, love it, the main threat around abortion in this country was to do with decriminalisation. So that was people lobbying to remove abortion from the criminal law and make it even more kind of accessible, even more normalised, and remove any remaining protections that are still in place for women and unborn children. So that's kind of what we've been campaigning on mostly for the last couple of years. And one of the key vehicles that the abortion lobby had been using or threatening to use was tabling amendments to the domestic abuse bill. And that's kind of what we were expecting to happen next. But actually, this bill was debated a few weeks ago in the virtual parliament, and not a single mention of abortion. I sat through an entire debate and not a word of it. So probably the reason this is, they've actually got a lot of what they wanted through these emergency coronavirus measures. And also they got what they wanted in Northern Ireland in a different way. So what has been happening? On the 30th of March, so nearly 2 months ago now, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, approved 2 temporary measures to allow women to self-administer medical or chemical, as I prefer to call them, abortions at home without meeting a medical professional in person. So there was quite a saga with this happening. The week before, the health department had announced that this was happening, and then the same day, the same evening, it was swiftly taken off the website, and messages were going around saying, no, this was done in error, there is to be no changes to the abortion regulations. The Health Secretary repeated that, it was repeated in Parliament. We thought we'd had a lucky escape. But no, on the 30th of March, there was another U-turn, and it has now been introduced. So it's also been introduced in the devolved administrations, so in Scotland and in Wales, though not in Northern Ireland, which is a slightly different situation. So within days of this government approval, BPAS and Mary Stopes, the 2 main private abortion providers in this country, had launched pills by post services. So women can now have an online consultation and have the pills posted to them. So you may have heard we've been campaigning about this issue of home abortions for the last few years, but where this is different is that it's now both stages of the medical abortion can take place at home. So in 2018, the second pill was allowed to be taken home by the woman, but they were still having to go to the clinic or the hospital still have to have a consultation, still see a medical professional, have all the kind of consultations and safeguarding and all of that in a physical place, and then take the second pill home. Now they don't see anybody in person, they take both pills home, do it all themselves. So you might ask if this is legal. We believe that it is not. The text of the Abortion Act does not allow for unsupervised abortions, and to classify the home as a place where abortions can take place is just ridiculously broad. A home could mean anything. However, SPUC has been to court on this several times about home abortions generally, and when we were defeated, and I believe Christian Concern were in court today about the current home DIY abortions situation, and they've been refused permission for a judicial review. So whether it's legal or not, it's like, well, we don't think it is, but in the technical, what the lawyers say right now, then yes, it is. But the more important question is whether it is safe. So I spent most of my day yesterday looking through submissions to a select committee inquiry. This is how exciting campaigns work is. And so many of these abortion providers and other groups that support abortion have been making submissions to this inquiry. And the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists in their submission said this completely safe measure has enabled self-isolation and saved NHS resources. I don't know about you, but I think saying that something is completely safe is quite a claim. Can we call any abortion completely safe? Well, obviously we'd say it's never safe for the baby, but calling any medical procedure at all completely safe seems quite overstated. So I actually looked up the dictionary definition of safe, just to have some comparison, and it's not likely to cause or lead to harm or injury, not involving danger or risk. So if that's what safe means, it's quite surprising that BPAS themselves on their website, and they've got a whole section on these pills by post procedure, and they have a list of significant, unavoidable or frequently occurring risks associated with medical abortion. And they state themselves that there is a 1 in 100,000 risk of death. And, I don't call that safe. And actually, the World Health Organization's definition of unsafe abortion is a procedure for terminating an unwanted pregnancy, either by persons lacking the necessary skills or in an environment lacking minimal medical standards, or both. And obviously, both of these things are the case for a woman self-administering an abortion at home. So it's in fact particularly ironic that the World Health Organization at this time had been saying that abortion is an essential service and recommending that women be able to manage their own safe abortions at home. Safe is also quite an subjective word in this context. It may be relatively safe in that for most women there won't be any major complications. But this is by definition a process which causes heavy bleeding and obviously the expulsion of the baby. And it always has unpleasant side effects. So I'm just going to quote Dr. Greg Pike, who is a research fellow at the BIOS Centre. And he said, "Simplistic assertions that medical abortions are safe do no justice to the real experiences of women. The question must be asked, safe from what? Clearly, most women who have a medical abortion are not safe from the very common and distressing experiences of pain, bleeding, nausea, chills, fever, vomiting, diarrhea, dizziness, and weakness, each of which can be severe. Neither are women safe from having experienced all of this, only to find they must then have a surgical procedure to complete the abortion, at rates perhaps between 6 and 10%. Neither are women safe from serious adverse events like blood loss requiring transfusion or infection, at rates that could be up to the 1% mark." Yeah, so it's important to note that medical abortions, doing it by a pill, has quite a lot more complications than a surgical abortion, and often women will end up needing to then have a surgical abortion if it hasn't completed properly, which would then obviously negate any benefit of having an abortion at home. So that's kind of medical abortions generally, but there are also particular risks associated with taking them at home. The first would be taking the pills at the wrong gestation. They're only designed to be taken up to 10 weeks of pregnancy, and it can be harmful or not work as well later into pregnancy. And obviously women are not now having any kind of dating scan. And if women are just guessing their own gestation, they often get it wrong. If you're basing it on the last menstrual period, apparently half of women will get this wrong. And you only need to be out by a couple of weeks, which could quite easily happen, to be taking pills at 13, 14 weeks when you think you're taking them at 10. So that would increase the risk of needing subsequent surgical intervention and other complications. There's also the risk of not going with the right time period. So they're supposed to be between 24 and 48 hours between taking the first pill and the second pill. And I can imagine, you know, a woman doing this by herself at home, she probably just wants to get it over with. She might not go with with exactly how it's supposed to happen. Again, this increases the risk of complications. And then just generally misusing drugs. Just with drugs, generally the misuse rate is quite high. And when it's something with quite a precise regimen like these pills, then the risks are obviously increased. We'd also be very worried about the psychological risks. So we have a sister organisation, ARCH, the Abortion Recovery Care and Helpline, which gives counselling to women who are suffering after an abortion. And they often talk about how the place where an abortion took place is a particular trigger. You know, they might not want to drive past that clinic. Then obviously if it's in your own home, your own bathroom perhaps, just the potential for psychological trauma there is heightened. And so one of the things we've been particularly concerned about with the situation of just getting pills via an online consultation and having them posted to you is vulnerable women being coerced into an abortion. It's in fact very interesting that the government itself put this forward as a reason as to why they were not bringing in this measure before they then did. So in Parliament, the government spokesman, Lord Bethell, said, "We do not agree that women should be able to take both treatments for medical abortion at home. We believe it is an essential safeguard that a woman attends a clinic to ensure that she has an opportunity to be seen alone and to ensure there are no issues. We really want to support an amendment that could remove the only opportunity many women have, often at a most vulnerable stage, to speak confidentially and one-on-one with a doctor about their concerns on abortion and about what the alternatives might be. The bottom line is that if there is an abusive relationship and no legal requirement for a doctor's involvement, it is far more likely that a vulnerable woman could be pressured into having an abortion by an abusive partner." So we completely agree with that, and that's what the government said a couple of days before they U-turned and allowed this. And one of the very sad features of this coronavirus pandemic is that domestic abuse has gone up massively. Refuge and other domestic abuse charities are reporting that. And we know that abortion coercion and reproductive coercion generally is strongly associated with domestic abuse. And it's something we've been highlighting for a while in our briefings and on our document on abortion and women's health. So removing these pills from any kind of medical setting increases the opportunity for abusive partners to force women into having an abortion. It also means that there's a reduced opportunity to detect this. So I've been, reading studies on domestic abuse, and they've been suggesting that, in fact, more is done at abortion clinics to identify these women. And now this is nothing. So it removes the opportunity for a healthcare professional to talk to a woman confidentially. There's also the danger of false acquisition of abortion drugs. So if anyone can just ring up and say that they need abortion pills, how do we know that it's going to the woman that it should be, as it were? So these are all quite obvious issues, I think, but actually Mary Stopes and the other abortion providers are denying that these are problems. So in these submissions that I was reading yesterday, Mary Stopes is saying that safeguarding can be conducted effectively over the phone, and we have confidence that safeguarding is equally effective, if not more effective, through remote consultation. I just really cannot see how they get to that conclusion. And the British Society of Abortion Care Providers goes further, and clearly we've been rattling them a bit because they're quoting anti-abortion groups. So their members expressed their view that anti-abortion groups often state that safeguarding can only be provided in face-to-face consultations. Providers have protocols in place to ensure that a woman is able to talk in private and is not being coerced. It seems likely that this is easier to achieve where a woman can use her own phone in private than when she has to attend a clinic where a coercive partner is aware of, or indeed even present at her consultation. BSACB believes that some women will be better able to talk freely when they are in their own environment than they may when in a clinic environment that might feel intimidating. Though I don't know about you, but this sounds ridiculous to me. We're all of us are living in lockdown. I'm living in quite a big house with nice people who aren't trying to track my movements, and I still find it very hard to have a telephone call that nobody else can hear. So the idea that a woman in an abusive relationship will find it easier to go have a private phone call when she's literally locked into the house with the abuser, honestly, I find that quite astonishing. And the idea that they are going to be more comfortable in their own environment, again, where the abuser is, than in a clinic, which he would not be allowed into. It is practice in all abortion clinics that a woman is seen alone, at least for part of the consultation. So if that's the kind of rhetoric we're getting from the abortion clinics, from the abortion providers, it shows how little they can be trusted on any of these issues. So there's a lot of other stuff with these submissions to the select committee. They are all calling for this to be permanent. MPs are defending this on the grounds that it is temporary, and many of them in good faith saying, well, of course you don't want women going out to clinics when they should be shielding, or they shouldn't be leaving home due to government guidance. So you can see where they're coming from. So all of these MPs saying, don't worry, it's only temporary. It will all be over once this coronavirus thing is over, whatever that might be. But no, all these abortion providers, they want it to be permanent, and they're saying so very openly. They've also got lots of other ideas about how things ought to be changed. They want to extend the gestational limit for medical abortions. So apparently in Scotland, the limit is actually higher. They say you can use it up to, I think, 12 or 13 weeks. This British Association of Abortion Care Providers is saying there shouldn't be any gestational limit, which is terrifying. They're also recommending getting rid of the 2 doctors rule, only having 1 doctor certify, or even just having another healthcare professional, not a doctor, certify for an abortion. Talking about having the morning after pill free of charge, just lots of other changes that they would like to bring in. So we're really trying to emphasize that this is not a temporary thing. This is really worrying. It could have long-term effects. So we're running a public health campaign at the moment, calling it Tell the Truth campaign. So we want the government to tell the truth about what is happening, about what they've allowed. This went through with no parliamentary scrutiny. So, it was debated in Parliament, they said no, and then they did it without debating it in Parliament. So they really need to be pressured to take responsibility for what's happening. So we've got a briefing on our website. We're encouraging people to write to their MPs, and we have a number of questions that we want people to be asking their MPs, things like, how will the abortion providers be sure that a pregnancy is under 9 weeks and 6 days, which is what they're saying is the limit for these pills? How do they tell if there's, a woman has an ectopic pregnancy when there's no scan, when there's no physical consultation? How do they ensure that they're being taken by the intended recipient? Of course, what we want is for this regime to be scrapped, but while it is in place, we really want to make sure that the Department of Health is being held fully accountable to this. So we're asking people to get their MPs to write to the Secretary of State for Health and insist that he reports fully to Parliament and updates people on what is happening. We'd also like them to make sure that the NHS number of women who undergo abortions is put on the abortion notification form. So we have a real problem in this country where this data is not linked, so it's very difficult to know what actually happens. So in other countries, such as Sweden, for example, we have very good data on abortion. This is how we know that there's been a spike in complications since home abortion was allowed, because they link all this medical data. So that's something that ought to happen here, but doesn't. And we'd also want to insist that the Care Quality Commission be mandated to inspect abortion providers who are providing this pills through the postal service. So the CQC has currently stopped inspecting clinics during this time. Yes, so I'd really like to encourage people to go onto the website, see our briefing, and write to your MPs. It's something that can still be done during lockdown, one of the few things we can do. I'll just move on quickly to some other things that are going on at the moment. So Northern Ireland, so you'll be aware that last year an amendment to a bill was passed in Parliament to impose abortion on Northern Ireland. And the government has held a consultation, and they published the new framework for legal abortion on the 25th of March, so just into Corona tide, as it were. And this framework is in many ways more extreme than what we have in the rest of the UK. It allows abortion on demand up to 12 weeks, which we don't have here. and then the same kind of criteria up to 24 weeks. It also completely removes abortion from the criminal law, which means that there's no penalty at all for self-induced abortions up to any gestation. So this was supposed to be voted on last week, but there's been problems with voting on it in Parliament. I think basically the Commons could have voted on it, but they haven't worked out how the Lords might vote on it. So this has been kind of indirectly affected by coronavirus. So we really want people to write to their MPs about that as well. We've actually had quite an encouraging number of MPs getting back and saying that they're planning on voting against it. Many of them on the grounds that this was something that should have been decided in Northern Ireland. It's a devolved matter, and the Northern Irish Assembly is now sitting again, so kind of any excuse for it has now gone. So the danger at the moment with everything that's going on is that this will just kind of slip through without too much attention. It's already, so the process of doing this was already breaking all parliamentary precedent. It was pushed through with very little debate, and we just want to make sure that there is as much debate and as much fuss about it as possible. I'll just say a little bit on kind of what the pro-life movement has been doing at this time. So obviously we've been campaigning a lot on this, writing all these briefings, running this Tell the Truth campaign, and also this Northern Irish campaign. In many ways it's been quite difficult because a lot of our campaigning does involve sending people bits of paper in the post and then getting them to go and hand out these bits of paper at public places, but can't do that at the moment. But people have been responding really well to email alerts and responding really well to our calls to write to MPs. Obviously it's something you can do while you're sat at home. We also had in the last month was the 52nd anniversary of the implementation of the Abortion Act. And we normally have outdoor witnesses going on for that, people standing in the street with signs. Obviously we couldn't do that, but we got people to sign up for a prayer chain. And so all sign up to say that they were praying for the unborn at that point. And lots of people signed up to that. And we've got an online conference planned. And then I know just a little bit about what other groups are doing. I know that the kind of caring organisations such as Life have seen a huge demand for their services at this time, and so it's something to be aware of. And obviously the groups that offer women help outside clinics have not been able to do that either. So I think, you know, when this is over, or at least as over as it can be, we'll be able to see more just what the impact of all of this has been on women and on, you know, on pregnancy and on their babies. And also the impact of these home abortions. Yes, it's something that it's really terrifying in a way. I really think women are going to die from literally going through this at home by themselves, and if not die, be really traumatized. So it's really something to be aware of, to write to your MP about, and to try and make sure it doesn't go on a second longer than it has to. Okay, I think I'll leave it there and be open to any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. That was a fascinating talk. I just to start off the questions, was wondering if you had any thoughts about how this might affect the abortion debate, in that now lots of people their freedoms are being curtailed for the sake of protecting the lives of people who are vulnerable in our society, and if maybe like that might make people more conducive to sort of hearing pro-life arguments that, you know, are about, you know, curtailing bodily autonomy for the sake of protecting.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, isn't it? I've, you know, people making memes along those lines. You know, it's the kind of my body, my choice. You know, to wear a mask and that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, I really hope that it does make some kind of difference. I mean, hopefully all this time has made people reflect a bit more on the kind of nature of life and of death, and yeah, and our responsibilities to other people. And something that's been really encouraging is wanting to shield elderly people and the vulnerable people, particularly when there's been so much debate about euthanasia. And I think some of the political debates of recent times have ended up being quite anti-old people, which is, so I've always found very worrying. So to have this renewed care for the elderly and vulnerable is really good. But yeah, whether it makes people see the humanity of the unborn, well, I guess that's up to all of us to try and be making these points in a sensitive way.
Okay, thank you. I'll just say that if anyone has any questions, please post them in the Zoom chat, and then I'll ask them. Vincent asks, what are the issues surrounding the use of embryonic tissue lines in coronavirus vaccine research? I don't know.
Yes, right. So, yes, so for those of you that aren't aware, vaccines can be made in different ways. And there are a few vaccines that are around at the moment which have been made using a fetal cell line. So it's not that there is fetal tissue in a vaccine that you might take in the MMR, for instance, but there are cell lines which were derived from an abortion, I think, that took place in the 80s, and perhaps there was another one that took place in the 70s. And there are various different teams around the world working on vaccines. And I think it might be the Oxford one actually, is using a fetal cell line. And there are others which are using different cell lines or who are not using cells at all. So we have, as SPUC, we did write to the Department of Health, calling on them to try and use a vaccine which didn't have that kind of ethical conundrum. I mean, there are differing views about whether you could ethically use such a vaccine. You know, I think many people would go with, if it's all you could use, then you would have to do that. But obviously, if it's possible to create it using an ethical alternative, and it always is, you know, for instance, with the MMR, that is using a fetal cell line. My mother used to take me and my siblings to France and Ireland or whatever to get the one that was made from monkey cells, and it's, you know, it's the same vaccine, it's just made from a different cell line. Yes, we really hope that the vaccine will be made using an alternative way. There's just no need for it, you know.
Okay. Rasmus asks about how significant the spike in numbers of health complications are that you talked about.
Yep. Let me just go to my stats. So the thing about Sweden probably would be useful actually. Sweden. I mean, off the top of my head, the difference between medical and surgical is it's a couple of percentage points. It's maybe like twice as much. I mean, we're talking about kind of, you know, in the less than 10% range anyway. Sweden. Where's it gone? Well, yes. So off the top of my head, the Swedish study was saying that they'd seen a doubling of complications in this last time period that they were studying, and they were being cagey about why that might be, but they did say explicitly it might be because of the shift from in clinic to home abortions.
Okay.
As I say, we don't really have the data on it in the UK. The data from other countries is suggesting that home abortion might lead to more complications. And I really think for the abortion lobby here to be claiming that it's completely safe is just not supported. The very best they could say is that the jury's out and, you know, we'll see what happens at this time and then let you know. But it just stands to reason if you're having a medical, well, what they would call a medical procedure outside of a medical setting, the opportunities for things to go wrong are just heightened.
Yeah. Thank you. Peter asks, why are abortion providers putting women in such a vulnerable situation? Even if they think that abortion is all right, why do they still ignore the fact that this makes women so much more vulnerable?
Oh, well, good question, eh? What they're saying is that, you know, women shouldn't be having to leave the house during this time, you know, with the government guidance, all that kind of thing. As I said, they have been pushing for this change for a while. And to be honest, it has confused me because I have thought, well, why do they want to get this out of the clinics? Surely this takes it kind of away from them. But I think what it is, it's just this push to normalize abortion more and more, to try and make it less of a medical thing in a way, less something that can be kind of controlled by law. Yeah, they just want it to be really normal. And it does seem, yeah, because, you know, when you think about when abortion was first being campaigned for, they were trying to get rid of backstreet abortions, as in, you know, people having to have abortions, you know, at home or in non-medical places. And that's exactly what they're going back to. I think it is just this drive to normalize it, you know, something that you can do over the phone or over video chats and get through the post. Doesn't seem like such a huge, big ethical thing that people have big debates over. And also these submissions that I was mentioning to the health inquiry were interesting because BPAS explicitly said that it would save costs. I think what they were saying was, they would spend less on these early medical abortions and then they could put more into late-term abortions. But however you phrase it, it's not really a good look, is it, that they want to save costs on this?
Yeah. Joseph asks a more general question. How much do you think that pro-life organisations should aim to reduce the window in which women can have an abortion? And how much should we aim to persuade people against abortion outright in their campaigning?
Well, that's actually probably one of the biggest debates within the pro-life movement is, yes, to go for time limits or not. I think there are different kind of angles to that. I suppose it's whether you think that practically will work, could you change the law that way? And then does it help you win the argument? So practically, I don't think that it will work. It has been tried several times in this country, and whenever attempts have been made to lower the limit, it always ends up being hijacked by the other side or taken advantage of by the other side, and it's then further liberalised in some way. So when the limits went down from 28 weeks to 24, at that same point, it went up to birth for disability. And we just know that any kind of attempt in Parliament at the moment, we know we don't have the numbers for it. So if pro-life MP tabled an amendment to that effect, we know that there are more people likely to vote the other way, who would then table another amendment to say, let's get rid of the two doctors rule, or let's decriminalise, or or something else that we don't want to happen. So that's a practical consideration. And then I suppose it's a kind of more philosophical one about whether you think it will win the argument. Because actually most abortions in this country take place before, way below the legal limit anyway. Most of them are taking place below 13 weeks and even below 10 weeks. And I don't personally think it's helpful to make too much of a distinction between babies at different stages of pregnancy. If our argument is that a life is a life from conception, making too much of a distinction between late term and an early term, I'm not sure is helpful. Obviously, a late term abortion is in many ways more horrific. It's a more invasive operation. The baby is more likely to feel pain. So it's worth bringing those points up. But I don't think we want to be arguing that a 10-week baby is less important than a 14-week baby, say, when our whole kind of argument is based on the fact that a baby in the womb is no more or less valuable than a baby, a week later outside of the womb. But I think these are questions where you can, legitimately disagree and have, different tactics to achieve the same ends.
Okay. Yusuf asks, how hard is it to be a pro-life MP, given he would like to be an MP?
Oh, wow. Exciting. I think, yes, it depends. Sometimes it can be very hard. We've had, and I'm afraid it does depend a bit on which party you're going into. So, I'll give an example of one very brave pro-life MP, Dr. Lisa Cameron, who is in the SNP. And last year, maybe the year before now, time flies, she voted against the amendment to allow abortion in Northern Ireland. And it's important to remember that abortion is never whipped. It's, by convention, it's a conscience vote, and the SNP did not whip it. The SNP often choose not to vote on this on the grounds that it doesn't affect Scotland, but whatever, she was perfectly within her rights to vote, and she did. She was one of only two SNP MPs who voted against it, and the abuse she received was horrific. She was getting, thousands of messages. She's getting death threats, rape threats, people sending her pictures of, abortion victims, rape victims. It was really, really unpleasant, and people in her party tried to get her deselected. But no, bless her, I think it's kind of strengthened her resolve in a way. She just, she holds events for us. She's really helpful. So it can be very difficult. But then on the other hand, I'm sure you'll remember examples of politicians who just own it. A few years ago when Jacob Rees-Mogg, now the Speaker of the House, was it on Good Morning Britain or one of those big programmes? People were just asking him, and he was just like, I believe, life, well, he didn't say yap, he'd never say yap, would he? Said, you know, life begins at conception. He even said he, you know, didn't believe in abortion in the case of rape, which is one of the more difficult ones to defend on television. And people just accepted it. So I think to an extent, it is seen as something you're allowed to have an opinion on. I think there are other kind of controversial issues in society that you'd find it more difficult to express an opinion on in our today's climate. But it's certainly doable, and we need more pro-life MPs. And actually, a lot more of them vote the right way than you might think. I do a lot of analysing of voting records, and it's not as kind of polarised as you might think. We have about 80 MPs who consistently vote the right way, which is far more than who will actually stand up and say anything useful, but they will vote the right way, you know, God bless them. And then there are about maybe 100, 150 who consistently vote the wrong way. And then the rest of them are just a complete hodgepodge of sometimes voting this way, sometimes voting that way, and mostly abstaining if they can. So a lot of them just don't take any obvious view on it, and more than you think do vote the right way.
Okay, interesting. Amira asked, do you think that it is a realistic possibility that telemedical abortions will continue once coronavirus measures cease?
I think it is, unfortunately. I mean, these abortion providers have been very clear that it's what they've been campaigning for all along, and they had been talking about it beforehand. And it was clearly them that got the government to change their minds on this, you know, because we had the government openly saying that this was not going to happen, it was a mistake. And then a few days later, after all these bodies had been writing in open letters to the Times and things, it then changed. So the fact that they are already jumping on this select committee and all saying that it's something which ought to remain, yeah, I think it's very worrying territory. I mean, I am slightly reassured that pretty much all the emails and letters we've got back from MPs, they're all saying it's temporary. Okay. Politicians, but it does mean that we will be able to hold them on that. So that, like, no, you said it was temporary. I mean, I think at the very least, it probably won't stay in without some parliamentary scrutiny, which would at least allow us to, you know, kind of really campaign on it and get MPs thinking and voting on it.
Oh, thank you. Peter asks, how can we support the pro-life movement at this time?
Oh, right. You can write to your MPs. So that's one thing. Obviously, you know, be looking at our briefings, look at our website. I guess, yes, honestly, writing to your MP is something you can really do now. I've written whole blogs about why it's a good idea to write to your MP, particularly if you can, you know, actually write to them yourself, write your own email, write your own letter. I mean, obviously there are ways of just sending automated emails, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But we have found over, you know, decades of campaigning that, well, not necessarily handwritten these days, but a kind of personal letter that you have written or typed has so much more of an effect, particularly if you can put your own kind of personal story or slant on it. If you know anybody who's suffered from an abortion, or who has, you know, has an inspiring story of giving birth, or if you were talking about euthanasia and somebody that you're worried about, these things come across really well. So yes, do be writing to your MP. Obviously, social media is something you can still be doing at this time. I feel like I'm getting too old for social media now, even though it's a while, but you know, your students, you can use these things. Go on that TikTok thing, which I'm too old to know about. Still, yeah, and you know, and obviously it's not always spreading kind of controversial things, or, you know, talking about abortion all the time. It can be talking about really life-affirming things. And then, you know, there's been some lovely stories recently of, you know, babies recovering from coronavirus and things like that. Actually, also going back to your question earlier about, will this make people think about things a bit more? There's been a number of stories recently about all the babies who have been stranded in the Ukraine, who were born through surrogacy. You know, I think that is raising some questions on that, you know.
Yeah.
You know, babies kind of being created like this, and then, you know, being stranded from their real parent, well, from their biological parents. So there are ways to kind of use these stories to try and, you know, get people to think a little bit. Yes, and then there's lots of kind of interesting talks and things happening. You know, maybe not this one, but in general, I've seen that the March for Life are going online, and they're actually going to have probably a lot more high profile speakers than they would have done if it was happening in the normal fashion. And luck, we've had some good online sessions with Stephanie Gray in Canada, and I think there's one coming up, or was just happened with Josh Brahm, who does pro-life apologetics. So this is really a good time to kind of be getting on top of things, getting up to date, working on your kind of apologetic skills. And still just talking to people and spreading the word.
Okay, thank you. If anyone has any last questions, please do put them in the chat. I do have one more from Vincent, which says, do you see any possibility of success in legal challenges against the Northern Ireland changes based in it being unconstitutional, given that it was decided at Westminster and not Belfast?
Interesting point. I don't know so much about legal challenges in Northern Ireland, because our legal challenges recently have been on the home abortions thing. But I suppose they made the point at the time that the Northern Irish Assembly was not sitting. Yes, I'd certainly be interested to see what does happen with that, because abortion is devolved. The problem is that they're using all these kind of international UN kind of committees and things to quote their case, which actually, if you look into them, are not binding on the UK. But I think it's more that the appetite just is not there in the courts. There's been several legal challenges around similar things where you just think, surely, obviously, looking at this, then that is unconstitutional. That shouldn't have happened. It just doesn't tend to go our way. But with all these things, you have to kind of keep chipping away at them and keep chipping away at the edifice and find the weak spot.
Okay, we have one more question from Yusuf. Is the pro-life movement inherently Christian? Is there room for other religions?
Oh, there's definitely room for other religions. I mean, it is always a difficult balance to strike, because it is in this country, a lot of pro-lifers are Christians, and you do want to be kind of serving your base, as it were. But no, it's a human rights issue. Most of us, even if we have religious views as well, it's because we believe in science, we believe that a life begins at conception, and we believe that life has value. And you can come to that view through a religious route or just through a pure secular human rights route. And actually, a lot of my own pro-life views came from my father, who was an atheist. So it didn't really occur to me until, and more involved in the actual movement, that there would be any reason not to be a pro-life atheist, or any reason that it should just be Christians. No, it's definitely open to everybody.
Okay. Well, I think on that note, we'll wrap things up. Thank you, Alithea. That was a fascinating talk.
I hope so. It's always hard to gauge when it's over Skype. But yeah, thank you.